In this episode, I propose to deal with the lighting techniques. But before going directly into the techniques, I advocate that we develop a clear understanding about the lighting. There is a distinct difference between illuminating and lighting. For example, when we enter into a dark room and switch on the light, we essentially illuminate the room. We don't call this lighting as there was no deliberate use of the light to accomplish any aesthetic effect. Similarly, haphazard switching of few lights in the set of a studio also does not qualify as lighting. Lighting is a creative manipulation of light. In the words of lighting innovator Ross Lowell, the founder of the Lowell Light Manufacturing Incorporation, the aim of lightings are to enhance mood, atmosphere and drama, separate planes, suggest depth, reveal character and texture, enrich and occasionally bedazzle. Lighting is an essential part of film and television production. There are many reasons why one light up a shot or a scene. Among them, the indispensable creation of light is to fulfill the technical requirements of the system. Recording image on any photosensitive material or sensor requires certain amount of light. Therefore, light is an essential technical requirement of the system. Because of our binocular vision and the interocular distance, that is the distance between the two eyes, we experience the world around us in three-dimensional perspective. But when we capture 3D objects with a camera having a single taking lens, it renders flat image and we lose the depth perspective. With lighting, we can create an illusion of depth and thereby provide a natural look. For example, in this picture, look, there is hardly any separation between the subject and the background. But by adding extra light like this, we can reveal the depth perspective. Adding additional light on preferential elements can draw the direct attentions of the audience, and thus this is often used as an important tool. For example, in these narrative films and promotional films, adding lighting treatments are often made to give extra importance to the lead players in the movie. Lighting can help to establish the mood of the scene, make the scene feel happy, sad, mysterious, or even dangerous. A DOP, that is the director of photography, works hand in hand with the director of the film to design a lighting scheme that adds to the drama of a scene, intensifies or specifies the emotions. Those we are often attribute to the actors or the action. Earlier, while studying the different lighting situation, we have observed how the basic characteristics of the light differs at the different times of the day. From the same experience, we can say that studying the characteristics of lighting, one can attribute the shot with the time of its action. For example, if we carefully manipulate the lighting of a shot by changing its brightness, contrast, color, and shadow pattern, we can depict the time of its action. Lighting can be used as one of the elements of composition, and thus it can contribute to the overall aesthetic composition of a shot. As an example, look at this frame. See how the beam of the light here is contributing to the overall aesthetic composition of the shot. Creative lighting is an art form. Unfortunately, there is no formulas for good lighting, as because each and every lighting setup has distinctive characteristics, all of them cannot be treated in the same manner. Therefore, to master the art of creative lighting demands years of study, imagination, and experimentation. A lighting designer must possess sound knowledge, good tools, common sense, and above all, the willingness to experiment. In lighting, as in most creative endeavors, has some basic design guidelines. Mastering these guidelines can provide a firm foundation and help developing the basic lighting skill that can be the starting point from which one can develop more creative and challenging lighting designs. One such basic guidelines for designing a workable lighting design is called three-point lighting. The three-point lighting scheme is a standard method used for lighting three-dimensional objects in visual media such as photography, cinematography, videography, and computer-generated imaginaries. The scheme of three-point lighting is a simple yet versatile, which forms the basic of most lighting. Once you understand three-point lighting, you are well on the way to understand lighting techniques. The three-point lighting scheme uses three light sources, namely the key light, fill light, and the backlight, to provide the shape of the subject, controls the coherence or the contrast of the image, and provide the three-dimensionality by separating the subject from the background. We have borrowed the idea of this three-point lighting scheme from nature. In nature, under the open sky, the sun often performs as the key light. The key light represents the dominant light source that has the maximum influence on the look of the scene. The purpose of the key light is to create the shadow. The shadow created by the key light helps to reveal the dimension of the three-dimensional subjects, and it also tells us the direction of light. For example, look at this ball. The moment I add the key light, it casts the shadow and that reveals its dimension. The same is also true for any three-dimensional objects like this cube. Usually, the lighting of a set begins with the placement of the key light. In fact, key light can be placed anywhere at an angle in front of the subject. But remember, the dimension of the subject depends a lot on the placement of the key light. Key light can be placed either side of the camera. Placing the key light at 45 degrees to the side of the subject, that is in the horizontal axis and also in the vertical axis, discloses the normal dimension of a three-dimensional object. A properly placed 45-degree key light in portrait lighting casts a nose shadow on the other side of the face and forms a light triangle below the eye. The vertex of this triangle should be somewhere between the lines of the nose and the lips. Placement of key light at top angle and low angle produces different effects. Placing the key light below and pointing upwards, the subject lights the chin and the underside of the nose. It casts shadow upward, that is in the opposite direction of what we are habituated to see. The strange look of such shadow pattern makes the viewer feel unsettled. Low-angle key lights are usually used in horror or comedy scenes to provide a dramatic effect. Placing the key light at a higher elevation above the subject's head and pointing down towards the subject creates a deep shadow in their eye sockets, produce more prominent cheekbones and long nose shadow. Placement of the key light at a higher elevation usually produces an undesirable look. But to make the subject look sinister for some reason, one may apply this technique. Shifting the key lights towards the camera flattens the dimensions of the subject. On the other hand, moving the key light away from the camera enhances the feature. The features reveals maximum when the key light is placed at a 90-degree angle, that is at right angle to the subject. Comparatively, the features of an Aryan face is sharper than a Mongolian face. Now, to modify the features of these Aryan faces, a camera person may place the key light more frontal towards the camera and thereby subdue the sharpness of the face. Fill light is a secondary light. The purpose of the fill light is to fill the shadow created by the key light and thereby reduce the contrast. Remember, at no point of time, fill light should be completely remove the shadow that was created by the key light. Further, the brightness of fill light should not be stronger than the key light. In nature, the entire sky in front acts as a big reflector which bounces the sunlight and produces an ideal soft fill light. The quality of fill light is essentially a soft light and should not cast any noticeable shadow. To get soft light with artificial light, one may bounce the hard light from a white bounce board or from a white satin cloth. Alternatively, one can also pass the hard light through a diffuser screen like a gateway tracing paper. Most book recommends the placement of fill light on the opposite side of the key light. But by placing the fill light opposite to the key light often casts a shadow of its own. Placing the fill light on the same axis of the camera, little above the lens height, hides the shadow of the fill light behind the subject itself and provides an ideal placement condition. One can also easily dispense with the problem of double shadow. Backlight provides the definition and creates a subtle highlights around the subject's outline. The purpose of backlight is to separate the subject from the background. Separating the subject from the background provides a three-dimensional look which is otherwise being lost while capturing with a camera having a single taking lens. The backlight is ideally placed behind the subject in the same axis of the camera at an vertical angle of 45 degrees above the subject. While shooting in location, one may find difficulties in placing the backlight right at the back of the subject as the light stand might be visible in the frame. To overcome this situation, the light can be substituted with two lights placed from both the sides behind the subject. In difficulties of placing backlights from both sides of the subject can also be managed by single backlight, but that should be placed diagonally opposite to the key light. The brightness of the backlight may vary in range from the level of the fill light to the key light. At times, it may be stronger than the key light, but it depends on the reflectivity of the subject. For example, a person with blonde or grey hair needs far less light than someone with brown or black hair. The backlight also contributes to the mood of the scene. The more intense is the backlight, the more dramatic is the lighting effect. When the backlight is far away from the axis of the camera and hits the subject from the side and contributes to a certain extent to provide shading on the front visible surface of the subject, it is called kick light. Remember, kick light is also different from backlight. A backlight creates a rim that is thin outline around the subject without necessarily hitting the front surface of the subject at all. Background light is not listed in the three-point lighting scheme. When we lit up the foreground object, which is away from the background, with key light, fill light and backlight, then the object turns brighter than the background. At times, this difference of brightness between the foreground and the background creates an alienation. Now, to blend the brightness difference between the foreground with the background, we need to add background light. The background light is placed last and usually placed directly behind the subject and pointing at the background. More than one light could be used to light uniformly a background or alternatively to highlight points of interest. The background light is used to increase the light level of the background area of the set. The intensity of light in the background can be the same as the foreground, but there is no hard and fast rule for this. One can either brighten or darken the background's appearance by increasing or decreasing the amount of light in it. It has been observed that a half stop little lower than the light level in the background than the foreground makes the foreground objects stand out. In theatrical film and television production, the background light level is kept 1 or 2 stops under the level of the key light. But that's also a very broad generalization. The ratio between the key and the background light sets the mood of the viewer and can help a cinematographer to draw the audience attention in a big frame. Lighting scheme and its effect on mood of the scene largely depends on the lighting contrast ratio. Contrast ratio is referred as the ratio of the light levels between the brightest illuminated to the least illuminated parts of the subject. In other words, it is a comparison between the highlight and the shadow. Since the highlight parts of a scene is lit both from the key light and the fill light, therefore the contrast ratio is expressed as a ratio between the key plus fill is to fill. Lighting ratio can be determined by measuring the light level with the help of an incident light meter. Measurement of light level can be made either in terms of foot candles or in relation to the f-stops. There are some light meters, those can automatically calculate the ratio of key plus fill to fill alone. A ratio of 1:1 can only take place when there is no key, and that is the value of the key is 0 and has only the fill light. That means there is no highlight at all. At 1:1 contrast ratio, the lighting is absolutely flat. As there is no shadow, the lighting does not influence the drama of the scene at all. When the key light has the same intensity as the fill light, for example, if both the key and the fill has 100 foot candles, then the contrast ratio achieved is 100 plus 100 is to 100, that is 200 is to 100 or 2:1. A 2:1 ratio would be softer, more natural lighting with noticeable shadow and is perceived as bright and happy scene. Consider a situation when the key light has double the intensity that of fill light. For example, if the key is of 100 foot candles and the fill is of 50 foot candles, then the contrast ratio achieved is 3:1. As the fill becomes less, there is more shadows and the scene is now more dramatic. When the key light has thrice the intensity that of fill light, for example, if the key light is 150 foot candles and the fill is 50 foot candles, then the contrast ratio achieved is 4:1. Similarly, one can derive contrast ratio 8:1, 16:1 and so on. Higher the contrast ratio, more prominent is the shadow and more dramatic. A 16:1 ratio would be highly dramatic. Let's have an experiment. The scene is illuminated at the ratio of 2:1. It has both the key and the fill of 100 foot candles. Now gradually we are reducing the fill light and thereby increasing the contrast ratio. Let's now observe how the look and the mood of the scene is changing with the decrease of fill light and thereby increasing the contrast ratio. When we reduce the fill light to 50 foot candles, we are getting 3:1. Further reducing the fill light to 25 foot candles, we get 5:1. At 12.5 foot candles, we get 9:1. Fill at 10 foot candles, we get 11:1. And fill at 5 foot candles, we get 21:1. With this, we come to the end of this episode and also the lessons on lighting. So far in this episode, I have discussed about the objectives of lighting, the lighting techniques and the contrast ratio. There we have learned that lighting is the creative manipulation of light. There are no formulas for good lighting. But mastering some basic guidelines of three-point lighting scheme can provide a firm foundation and help developing the basic skill for lighting. And that can be the starting point from which one can develop more creative and daring lighting design. You can use the principles we have discussed here for lighting a happy scene or a suspense scene with murder mystery. Hope next time when you light up a set, you will play with the emotional intensity and will create a dramatic lighting setup.